This tutorial we're going to cover how to create a bill on a purchase order for when you receive the vendor's invoice. And this is when you're going to be using QuickBooks. So you'll be able to send the bill directly into QuickBooks. First thing you need to do is make sure that the purchase order has products that have been marked as received, and you can verify that going under shipping and receiving. And we covered this in another tutorial, but we'll pull it up and give you an idea of what we're going to. And we're receiving, and we're going to look at this PO. Whoop. It would help if I put the right number in. Now, let's see if this will open. Okay, so going under product information, and this is where something should be marked received. We'll just minimize that for a second. I'll show you what we're going to do. To create a bill or an invoice to go to QuickBooks, you'll go under Accounts Payable. Now you want to make sure your QuickBooks file is open to your company file. And you'll click on this Enter Vendor Invoices button. And this is where we're going to put in the information. So this is a Curry's invoice, so I'll pull up Curry's. Next thing we need to do is select the purchase order. And you notice there's three buttons here. It only pulls in the past 6 months of POs. If you have to go back farther, you'll have to check this button. If you want to check them all, check this button. So we're working on this 74871 invoice. Now this is what's going to happen when I try to open this. It's going to tell me there are no items marked received. So go back to the purchase order and enter the quantities received for this vendor invoice, and then try again. And you can see over here nothing's been marked received. Now another important field is this field over here. It's just not going to mean much, but this is an ID that QuickBooks will need before we can send this into QuickBooks. So we'll say OK to this. But if I were to open up, let's say let's do this one here. Now I get an additional message. Not all products have a QuickBooks ID to associate to a purchase order. Now it's too far over, we can't see it, but that column's probably blank. Whenever that is the case, if you have an older purchase order before this update goes into effect, then you will have to go into QuickBooks and create the bill for that vendor invoice manually. So you won't be able to do it here. So we'll say OK to this, and we get the same message about nothing's been received. Say OK to that. Alright, so before we do anything, we're going to have to pull up that purchase order again and mark something received. And again, just keep in mind we have to do this under the shipping and receiving to mark anything received on a purchase order. And again, that was covered in another tutorial. Alright, so, whoop, wrong one. We want the purchase order. And let's say this is only a partial shipment. There's 10 doors right here, but let's say we've only received 6 of them. So we'll type a 6 in here, and let's say that was the only thing received on this purchase order. So we'll go ahead and save that. So we save that quantity received. And then we'll come over to creating the invoice. Again, that was under, if you go to Accounts Payable, right here, Enter Vendor Invoices. So that's where we're going to be doing that. We pulled up Curry's, and we want the PO 74871. It should come up now. So you can see now we do see the quantity received, and we need to enter the invoice information now. See, right now we can't save anything because we need to complete a few other steps. So first thing you do is put in the invoice number. Now over here, if there were any previous invoices saved, they would be listed in this drop-down, but apparently nothing has been for this purchase order. So let's say the vendor invoice number is 123, whatever it might be. Then we need to pick a date of the invoice itself. Let's say this was on the 1st last week. If there was a discount, that's all automatically entered. That gets that information when you save the manufacturer. So if they give you a discount, you might want to go back there and update that if there's a typical discount. So that information will be entered. Okay, so now the next thing we need to do is you have two columns here, invoice quantity and invoice cost. So we need to enter the invoice quantity here. And we can do that one way you can do it is just by clicking this used received quantity for invoice quantity. So if I check that box, if I check this box, it will go down the list and mark the quantity received into this column here automatically. And I can do the same thing on the PO cost. I can just check this button and it'll fill in those values for me also where needed. It doesn't matter if the other ones are here because they're not going to be calculated anyway. So we have a PO cost here. If for some reason that cost is different on the vendor invoice than it is from your purchase order, you can manually type that in here. I don't think I'd have to go back and look, but I don't believe that would save it back to the purchase order, so you might have to update the PO also. But we're going to leave it as our cost on the PO matches the inventory cost or the invoice cost from the vendor. So once we get those filled in, we come up here to get invoice totals. That's going to give us the total for this invoice. So we'll click that button, and right there is the total. Now this total should match the invoice total that you have from the vendor. So check that and make sure that they do match. If there's any tax, you can go ahead and add it. If they don't match, you want to track it down and find out where the discrepancy is. Okay, so once we have that done, now you can see we have access to the Save Vendor Invoice button. So again, you want to make sure your QuickBooks file is open. This is actually the invoice here we're working on for Curry's 74871. Now we're going to go ahead and click Save Vendor Invoice. Now what's going to happen is this quantity received is going to be populated to our inventory count. So this will show as soon as we save this that I'm sorry, that actually happened when we saved it over here on the vendor on the purchase order. What this will do is count this towards the purchase order, I meant to say. All right, so we'll go ahead and click Save Vendor Invoice. And it's going to go through now and should be saving it to QuickBooks. And it will be, there we go. We'll say OK. So you can see it cleared out everything here. If we pull up QuickBooks, you can see there's that 123 bill that's been created. And if you double click it, you can see that item is associated to this PO 74871. We finally got the code from QuickBooks that allowed us to associate this to a purchase order. For the longest time, it took us 8 or 9 months to get that information. I don't know why, but it did. But fortunately, that's all done now. So there's our bill. It's been saved to QuickBooks. So let's just minimize this. And now let's say it's a few days later, we get the rest of the material in on that purchase order. So and again, we need to go back to the purchase order itself. Again, going to it under the shipping and receiving button here to pull that up so we can enter how many have been received. And let's see. So if I were to try to open that purchase order now, it's not going to open because nothing's been marked received. No new items, that is. So this, you can see everything is still blank. So what it did is it took that quantity of 6 and removed it from this received column and moved that under the previous received. So we always know how much we have received from on this purchase order. And it also gives us the balance left to invoice, or even to receive for that matter. So let's say OK to this. All right, so going back to the purchase order, let's say we get the rest of the items come in. Well, that's not showing. Let's clear that, close this, and we'll reopen the purchase order. That's from the shipping and receiving. Go into product information, and now you can see it shows the previous received. So now let's say we got the rest of the items in. There's 4 of these, and there's 6 of each of these doors. So all I have to do is check this button, and it automatically marks everything, the balance left, as received. 4, 6, and 6. And of course, if you need to save the location information, you can do that now. And we'll go ahead and save this. And we should be done with that purchase order. I'm going to go ahead and minimize that for now. Now, if we come back here, we go back to queries. We're going to enter. We received a second vendor invoice on this purchase order, and now you can see it's going to allow us to create another new invoice. So that previous invoice you can see is now listed as 123. You do have the option, if you ever had to delete that vendor invoice. You can see if I pull up that, I can click on that vendor invoice and it will bring in what it is I entered the last time. Let's try this again. I'm going to reselect that. Okay, so everything's back. Now we'll select this. And you can see we had the invoice quantity of 6, and that was a PO cost, or rather the invoice cost, and the date that we entered that for that purchase order. So let's reselect that again to clear everything out. We're going to enter a new vendor invoice for this second shipment that came in. Say this one's now 124, and we'll give this one a date of the 3rd. I'm going to go ahead and check this box. We'll use the received quantity to go under the invoice quantity, since that's everything left, and use the purchase order cost for the rest of the items. Now we'll get the invoice total. This will be the new invoice total, and that should match the vendor's invoice that you received, so make sure of that. Now we'll go ahead and save this. Say OK, pull up QuickBooks, and now you can see we have a second invoice here. So if you look at the second invoice, you can see all the items are in there and the purchase order that they're associated to for this bill. And if we look at the purchase order, it's also been marked received in full because we received everything on this purchase order. So this purchase order is complete. Now if we go back, let's do a search for that purchase order. We look under the search purchase order form. We'll no longer see that 74871 invoice in here because it is now complete. It's no longer an incomplete purchase order. So if I want to see the complete or that purchase order, I'd have to check there, click refresh, and there it is. So if I need to pull it up, take a look at it for whatever reason, I can open it from here, and you can see everything's been marked received, previous received. This purchase order is now complete. Okay, so that should cover it for entering a vendor invoice for purchase orders if you're using QuickBooks. If you don't use QuickBooks, it's a different process. That's covered under another tutorial. So if you have any questions on this, concerns or suggestions, please call or email. Thanks.